Welcome to Windows on the World. Very tight show for you tonight. Just want to tell you about a couple of things. Got some new uploads coming. Next few days they will be in the archive. I will put one of them onto the YouTube channel. Both will probably go onto Spreaker. One is called The Comedy History of Truthers, which contains information which those who are looking for it will find invaluable. By those who are looking for it, I mean those who are aware of what's actually going on. And this was a great revelation and a lot of fun to put together. I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll also be putting up The Perfected Minefield. We did a show on that. We did a follow-up show to it also, and an article on the homepage at Windows on the World called The Perfected Minefield. This, however, is a new approach. This goes along with the series of statements which may cause an outbreak of thinking amongst the receptive to new ideas and thinking, of course. And we're going to talk tonight about those who are not receptive and what can be done about that. Progress, a philosophical approach, incorporating the undeniable fact that time waits for no one. Well, let's start with a question. Are the followers of lies due the same divine justice as those who perpetuate or create lies? That's a very strong point and one to think about. There's a Roman maxim, ignorance of the law is no excuse, but which law? Well, there are two ways of looking at this. There is the law enforced, which may or may not be equitable, and there is the divine natural law. These are two different and often opposing things, but this maxim covers all if you see both sides of what it's actually saying. However, the main issue, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance and willful ignorance create delusional bliss, the deliberate act of cutting oneself off from uncomfortable truth. Well, this happens to all at some time. The difference is those who know they are doing it and correct the behaviour patterns which lead to it, and those who don't and actually continue to revel in it. The ongoing life project of removing anything which challenges uncomfortable truth or even personal preferences is called progress, real progress, not just perceived progress. This is a stage of real evolution, but one which is halted by the self or outside influences. It keeps minds self-serving, simple and dependent on imposed groupthink. This is also what the term national security really means. The security which comes from willful ignorance and seeking an easy life or robotic laziness is best for national security. The term means the financial position and control of the population of a country. Trivial mindedness is cultivated, however. We are in an age of trivial pursuits. There was a time when I believed it was reasonable to assume that if there appeared to be progress in the understanding of governing principles, let's say an awareness of the events which drive change, that eventually, after this was realised, there would arise an unfolding of the bigger picture. This, however, is not the case. The last several years have unfortunately proved this beyond any reasonable doubt. The biggest challenge of all is the undoing or removal of wrong or useless information. The overcoming of repeated wrong information is not happening. Why? When listening to repeated proven facts, there is nearly always some major error that is thrown in, which from that point on means whatever useful and factual information has been absorbed is thrown off course by what can be just one error. Even if everything previous to it has been true, everything after this point becomes discredited and useless. Once something which is not true is implanted, everything before and after it becomes useless. That's what we're getting to in this show. How much of this should we tolerate? Should we tolerate it at all? Well, for most, there is simply no way out of this. This interruption in the field halts all progress. Seeing this close up forces one to make a choice. Does one compromise and say, well, they get most of it? Or does one take a more definite approach and stop wasting time with such interrupted minefields? The imposed belief is that we find common ground. Unfortunately, it's too late for that. There's no time for it. One either lets such minds hold you back through compromise, or one cuts them loose. It now appears that the distinction between those who consider themselves informed and those who actually are has considerably widened. So bearing in mind that time is too short and things are moving faster, the answer can only be to disregard the interrupted information and those who perpetuate it. I tried to tell this to several groups. Well, I wasn't imposing it by telling them. I was suggesting that if they perpetuated and continued to perpetuate this involvement in issues which were in reality of no importance, then this would prevent them making any future progress. Unfortunately, this happened to turn out to be absolutely correct. They are still going round in these predicted circles, and they will never get out of it because they have decided not to. The many stages of development cannot and should not be stopped by these encounters. The fact is they are trapped, and there is, after all this time, no way out. They are literally going backwards, and no matter how much repetition of new information there is, they always seem to regress or at least never move on. Does this sound familiar to you? Because I think those who listen to this show do get it, and I'm not preaching to the converted here. I'm reinforcing something of utmost importance, something that I've been having conversations about, well, over the past couple of years. And out of that has come real progress, especially, I think, from the point of view that I can see before me, that of the information which is put out in the shows. It's become so much more focused and so much more concise. That's the point. Editing is everything, especially in this information field, which is not only full of disinformation and distraction, but basically full of time wasting. The fact is, yes, those that are trapped have no way out. They are literally going backwards. And no matter how much repetition of new information there is, they always seem to regress or at least never move on. Key point there. It has been a recurring theme over the last several years. There appears to be a recognition of a wider field of information, and then the recipient of the information goes back to a point which indicates they have not taken the new information on board. Have you had experience of this? I'm sure you have. This is the essence of what is happening in the present time. This happens even when the recipient seems to have listened and taken in the information. And I've had so many examples of this over the past several years, and it's actually taken me aback, because I'll say something that I think is perfectly obvious and should be obvious to those who say they listen to certain information, and they react angrily because you're pointing out that they are in fact contradicting themselves with what they're saying. This has been my experience, especially after honing down my own energy field and the information which I take in, but more importantly than that, the information that is being put out in the shows, because I certainly do not want to waste anyone's time, and I've never done that. That's the key. So to be concise, edit information and have the right information is paramount to what Windows on the World is all about. Information which clearly should be integrated in order to move forward and stop any time wasting. The information has to be integrated properly. Once something is thrown into the field of information which is no good or is slightly off, or even just very slightly off, it causes a retardation in the field and people go back to square one. I've seen it time and time again. Indeed, it has been proved that later nothing has actually been properly absorbed and integrated into progress and, more importantly, right action. Right action just means your response to everything that is going on around you. And it means that you're responding in the correct way, because if you respond in the correct way some of the time, but not all of the time, you're still going back to square one. Does this sound in any way familiar to you? I hope it does. In these shows, I've used the term arrested development a lot to describe this current state, because it actually perfectly describes it. So therefore, some of these phrases do become a little overused, but they are necessary because they are so concise and practical as to what is being talked about. So new and essential information fails to be absorbed or acted upon. This is the key point. The recipient goes back to before the new information should have been absorbed and stays there. I've seen this happen for years in the same individuals. It is clear they do not actually tune into the field of intelligence, which gives the overview of the processes being used and the information which is being implanted. It appears to be this misunderstanding alone, this misunderstanding of intelligence or inability to use it, to use the intelligence, which is behind this lack of progress. What does it take to make leaps which many think they have already made, but clearly they have not? Why do some make the leaps and so many don't? I'm going to try and answer these questions during this show. It has come down partly, of course, to choice. Laziness. Despite what many think, they have never had it so good by being allowed to stagnate and quite enjoy it, as there are always entertaining distractions. To move out of this and leave this behind, there are shows which are a series of statements which are put out called the Protocols of Power, which invoke thinking and philosophical engagement. And of course, since I came across that idea as a way of communication, I'm putting it into a lot of other things that are being put out. For instance, this audio I'm putting out over the next couple of days of the perfected mind field, the key points put down in a series of statements which are actually there to philosophically open up the mind, and so the bigger picture emerges. It's called the eureka moment. It's called inspiration. It's called actually enlightenment. That's what it really all means. Without intelligence, which by that I mean integrated, sentient, overall understanding, absolutely nothing can be achieved, which is why we see this stagnation and lack of achievement in all the groups, whether they are steered or not, because by accident or design, they are all going in the same direction. Or this has been my experience of all people who collectivize. And it's a very important point, because groups can be very effective if they have a sole aim, and an aim which is absolutely unwavering. Then, of course, the group should either disband or reform as another group, because we all know what happens by now. Everything gets infiltrated. The mind field of all groups is infiltrated, especially if they're going against a controlled narrative. And we brought this up in this show that's going to come out, the comedy history of truthers. Now, it was brought up at the beginning of that show that the terms conspiracy theory and truther are globalist created terms. So in order to usurp and move on from being in these egregorial groups, one has to redefine one's position within them and then step out of them, because these are controlled minefields, nothing more. So the lack of understanding of this is what perpetuates the cycles which are never broken. Those who do not get this will say it's pessimistic. Well, that's proof that they are indeed stuck and can't get out of their self-imposed underdevelopment. This is what happens when a fact is presented as a possible solution. This is the stage that millions are in. To get and be able to get beyond this is almost impossible whilst following the cycle of news or any other distraction. To those that do get it, there is the eureka moment. It all becomes clear. This is what has been known, as we said, as enlightenment. Same thing, same process. All referred to in the Perfected Mind Field and the follow-up show, which is in the article on the homepage. So I'm kind of following on with ideas, concepts, which I hope will be of use. Otherwise, of course, there's no point. So there's a new audio coming out, and that will soon be in the archive. Do let me know what you think of it, because I want to know if this way of putting out information works for you. Well, pretty much everything presented nowadays is a distraction, something for everyone. This only works if you are willing to be absorbed into and operate within the confines of a given artificial construct, though. But it is unfortunate that most were captured in one way or another, but this must not distract away from matters of utmost importance. This is what we get into. Do we let this distract us? Do we wait, or do we move on? Social change theory. Yeah, that's what they call it. A theory which helps in the creation of artificial wombs, especially for those who have some of the truth. They need to be captured, and of course most are. And most never even question this. The appeal to unconscious laziness, or even a fragment of what is known as biorobotization or unconscious hypnosis, is all that it takes. So you have to be constantly not so much vigilant as aware. The field of open awareness is there all the time, the unified field, what the Victorians called the ether. It's all there. And then, of course, people get steered away from that with New Age concepts and rubbish and fads and things that appeal to low intelligence. By low intelligence, I don't mean anything to do with IQ and any of that. I mean the decoding of the field of information, which is not anything to do with academic intelligence or learned intelligence. It's something which has to be experienced and then learned from. So there is the appeal to any idea of conformity, especially in those that believe they are not conforming. This is an essential tool. It's very effective against the groups. These groups that think they are outside control are often the easiest to control. Just tell them what they think they want to hear or what they believe they want to hear. Oldest trick, works every time, unless it is interrupted and disrupted. And then the interrupter or the disruptor becomes the target of the hive mind of the group and is ostracized. That's usually what happens. That disruption of the controlled biofield is what Windows on the World shows are really all about, and are really what we've been covering, especially recently. Well, it does, however, get rid of those already captured. They don't get it. That's the issue. So you have to lose quite a few on the way. And I think we've successfully done that. And by successfully, I mean that it was essential. They find an excuse to bail out, and they do. Many have. That's a good thing. The weakening of the information field by minds who have not got the ability to integrate knowledge will destroy the biofields of those who do. And I've seen this happen time and time again. It's like an attack. And then it becomes unconscious within the group, and they unconsciously attack you. Whether this is intentionally, by disagreement, based on ignorance, or deliberately, of course, is of no consequence. The result is the same. This is why there has been no effective action taken on nearly all fronts, especially after what has happened in the past several years. I'm going to be back after a very, very short break with some more very essential information and hopefully some conclusions which will help you actually rationalise what has been going on. Welcome back. So, we were talking about groups and why people individually were not having action around them which could actually be of any use. But there is no difference between groups who apparently oppose each other either. In fact, they are necessary to create outcomes and reinforce this illusion of choice. An interesting and relevant point is how the manufactured COVID project and its barefaced audacity and in-your-face depopulation plan was so soon forgotten. Wiped from memory, it appears. This can be partly explained by the sheer relentless propaganda and restriction through mind control and the ongoing injection casualties, a need to not face the truth as it would end what people believe is positive stability. National security, in other words. Meaning not facing up to the reality and the real objectives of it, because it would destroy all that has been believed and absorbed over lifetimes. The uniformity of belief would be gone, and it would, in the terms of the media, create chaos. So, has anything of real value been learned from it all? What's happened over the past 4 years by the majority? I would say no. This stillness does not explain why it seems to have been wiped from recent memory, though. It was mainly a psychological war program to achieve goals, which it did quite successfully. However, it was badly executed, and for those with perception, it gave insights into the flaws of those behind it all. In the end, it was a very useful experience. When this COVID agenda, this psychological war, was officially announced, I was actually quite fascinated because I wanted to see how it was going to unfold. In other words, because of previous information, it was possible to detach oneself from the frustrations and the anger that were being experienced by a lot of people. I actually found it quite interesting and exhilarating. The importance of recognising patterns here is paramount. This also came up in a recent conversation about how a few could see through any controlled opposition and most could not. How many actually learned about strategy and solutions through the COVID plan? Not many. Most who believed they were not complying in some way were actually missing the point. With a little insight, a lot of time could have been saved, which was actually wasted. Only those who knew about repeated patterns learned how to get round the propaganda from both sides, the for and the against. Both a waste of time. Those who were pro-vax and those who were against it, well, this is part of the same thing. It's all missing the point. There was no effective public action taken during the fake pandemic. And it could have been quite easily. Recently I found a film that I'd made 15 years ago called Puppet Masters of Occupy Revisited, about the Occupy in I learned a lot from. And in it, I was being interviewed and I made the point that the World Health Organization in 2009 had imposed a global level 6 pandemic during the swine flu scare. Remember, this is 15 years before COVID, or thereabouts. So, it's 15 years since I made the film, but at least 10 years. So, the swine flu scheme was later to be debunked as a criminal scam to impose and sell vaccines. Even on mainstream, a documentary successfully took it all apart. The point I made was that even though the level 6 pandemic was never justified or even properly legally imposed, it was never rescinded, meaning that it kept running from 2009 until 2019 when it was imposed and taken up when the time was right for the COVID scam. So the legal restrictions were already in place. A level 6 global lockdown was a legal construct which was just waiting for the right time to be imposed. This is the importance of pattern recognition for those who can see it. This pattern recognition is essential for progress. The point being here that the wiping of memory after COVID and the need to shut out the memory and get back to normal was not useful for the evolution of those who were put through it. In fact, it was entirely to their detriment. The same thing can be said for the energy harvesting distractors who are pushed one after the other. The whistleblower who leads you nowhere, the ex-cop, the insider, or simply the next media distraction. If you are following any of this, you are not recognizing patterns. You are being an unconscious biorobot hooked on hopium and the next distraction. Those caught up in this are essentially stuck for life unless they can focus on only the important matter of integration of the knowledge and information being presented. In the case I mentioned about the level 6 pandemic being legally still in place for at least 10 years, how was this information useful and to whom? Nobody I know put this together with what was being imposed when COVID happened. But, and I'm not saying I'm in any way special here, that's not the point of what I'm making. What I'm saying is that having absorbed that and thought about it and integrated into a bigger picture, I knew that there was a reason they didn't rescind that level 6 pandemic. There was a reason for it, because it was going to become a reality. It took 10 years to become a reality, but it did happen. This is why integrated long-term memory of information is so useful and has to be achieved in order for progress to actually be present. One could ask, so what difference did it make to know this? Well, I've just told you in a way. But when the psychological war officially started on the 11th of March 2020, it was clear that the lockdown rules and the restriction of movement would be imposed as in the definition of level 6, as the World Health Organization had taken over the narrative, as was predicted in a paper also from 2007 called A Safer Future, which I only found a few years ago. But because I had the pattern recognition of the pandemic narrative, when I read A Safer Future, it put everything into perspective that had happened over the last 15 years and was going to happen in the future. All this was to open up the path for what was to come. This small, tiny fragment of knowledge was the precursor to what was to come, and therefore it was no surprise when it happened. My reaction was, literally, when it came on the TV, because I was keeping up with what was going on, I went, oh, it started. And I started to feel a sense of relief. And I started to feel empowered by it, by what they were doing, which is a very strange response to most people. But that's what this is about. So this endless obsession with the news cycle, with the latest conspiracy nonsense, is holding everyone back who gets into it and keeping them in, yes, I have to say it, arrested development. So rather than getting angry or feeling helpless, This small snippet of recalled information put it all into place. Just one tiny bit of information. It essentially saved time and exposed the weaknesses in the definition of what they were actually doing. Because when they did it, it was so half-arsed an event that with a little clarity of thought, most of it could be disregarded as purely psychological, which it was. Nothing of any substance was behind it all. When the curtain was lifted, there was actually nothing there. However, those who felt they were fighting this new tyranny got sidetracked by the steered truther movement or drawn into public acts of collectivized compliance, which was presented as non-compliance. In other words, they could have been doing something much more useful, building something, going about things under the radar, actually getting ready, and even, dare I say it, enjoying the experience and having a good laugh at it, which is, of course, very empowering. So the imposed illusion of resistance, the addiction to worthless distraction, like the taking apart of endless statistics, and of course the insiders spilling the beans, is a side issue. It's of no importance to what's going on at all. It's just there to keep you on a hamster wheel until the next useful idiot of truth appears. It is part of the news cycle which creates the necessary inaction through distraction and then laziness, which actually, along with the steered protests, stopped any useful action or underground organisation taking place. This should be the biggest and only worthwhile lesson from the whole operation of COVID. However, it was not taken on board, and the result was that rather than COVID being a great learning experience and catalyst, it has actually corralled all opposition into a world of sound bites, into those who follow distractions. So, the psych warfare term, new normal, actually describes how the opposition was captured during the COVID operation. It might look like things are back to normal, but in reality, the unaware have been steered into the next phase of compliance. They're already in it. They now follow the constructed channels of false opposition and do so willingly, and with half-arsed and ever more distracted, unconscious compliance. And that was the main thing that prompted me to outline this. There is unconscious compliance to trutherism, to New Age, to all of the distractions, and it's getting worse. People I thought knew better have slipped backwards. In other words, COVID has regressed them. They've learned nothing from it. Absolutely nothing. But however, here's the good bit. This is still a choice. As we said, ignorance of the law is no excuse, but also ignorance of the essential is a choice. The simple patterns are easy to recognize, but there are entertaining distractions and mind candy to be consumed. Well, mind candy rots the brain and causes inaction. A sort of mental diabetes ensues, and this is the real pandemic. The pandemic of the mind. So the announced pandemic was, of course, fake, but the real pandemic is ongoing and getting worse. And these shows are concerned only with such matters of importance. So the question arises, is there enough time to get up to speed for those who are in this self-imposed control mechanism or dilemma? In other words, those who have a little bit of information, but have, say, one implanted bit of wrong information or distraction, which takes them back to square one. So every day is, as they say, Groundhog Day. They post the same things on their social media, they say the same things to their friends, and they feel as though they are in some movement which is outside the norm, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, let's answer the question. Is there enough time to get up to speed for those who are in this self-imposed control mechanism or dilemma? The answer, after careful consideration, has to be no. The choice and the solution, however, is still there. Do you spend time compromising to keep an accord with such people? Or do you move on with the journey of acquiring more useful information and focusing on solutions? It has, at this late stage, of course, to be the latter. You have to move on acquiring useful information and solutions. Remember that a lot of information that's presented is neither useful nor a solution. The plan is, of course, very far advanced, and any restriction of progress must now be rejected. Those stuck and distracted can only make progress by themselves. Key point. Many are self-conditioned not to make progress. Well, this was, and of course is, their choice. Missing the point is the problem, and the point is continually missed. The high-minded and full of themselves with just a little information in tow are a massive liability. I have had to make this decision about many who I hoped would get the bigger picture. I spent years enthusiastically pummeling away, thinking they'll get it eventually. And they didn't. And they still haven't. So those stuck in this cycle of going round in the same circles, the same social circles, the same information circles, are going nowhere and will continue on that path until, of course, the chain is broken. What has become most obvious is that it is only they who can free themselves. There is nothing that can be said or done at this point which is going to change anything in these people. They have to do it themselves. And of course, we have to come to terms with the fact that most won't. But that is totally unimportant in the bigger scheme of things. There was and never will be a mass awakening. Those who believed they were awake when they were not have proved that point conclusively. The good news is that freedom from carrying dead weight is exhilarating, as it frees the mind and spirit to journey on. I hope those statements were useful. I thought about them very carefully. I don't do anything flippantly on this show. And I have to remind you that the Comedy History of Truthers and the Perfected Minefield audio will be up on even YouTube, which of course goes to Odyssey. We don't put much on YouTube because half of my stuff's been taken down off there. And there's still notifications coming in, a few a month, that unfortunately I've been putting out medical misinformation. And even the Truthers got one of my videos taken down. But the information's all on the website and it's all in the Spreaker shows. They may be able to take it off YouTube, but it still exists on Odyssey. And of course, Spreaker, where our Sunday shows are. So subscribe to us on those channels, please. Do support the show. We have become the most marginalised show on the internet, as far as I know. There must be more marginalised people, but that's the thing about marginalised people. We don't know about each other. So, hope that was all useful. Lots more useful information will be coming your way. And I'm very grateful to those who send me the feedback and support the show. So do please support us because we need your support. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope this was useful.